I've been responding to a series of 50 arguments that are offered on an article or a website called God is Imaginary. And the sixth of these, I've previously addressed the first five. And by the way, the goal of these responses is two or three things. One is to suggest ways of replying to these from the standpoint of those who do believe in God. Secondly, to challenge those who don't believe in God, or maybe those who are unsure of the question, by giving them ways to think about these things from a Christian, specifically Christian perspective. And these 50 arguments that are offered on this website are arguments that are specifically addressed to Christian believers. There are some things in there that criticize belief in God in general, but most of it assumes that the audience that they're speaking to is a Christian one. And so my real goal is just to suggest ways that Christians might respond to these things for the benefit of Christians, but also for the benefit of those who may be doubting, or maybe even those who are assured of their atheism, and to show how Christians might suggest a way forward in the discussion. The sixth argument is entitled Ponder God's Plan, and it's really an argument, a version of the argument from evil in the world, that there are things that are happening in the world that seem to not have a good purpose to them, and therefore there can't be a God who wills good things for us behind that. Basically, the argument goes like this: whatever happens, God wills it. That's one of the important assumptions of the article. The article very heavily depends on a book by Rick Warren, in which he makes a series of statements about things being the will of God. Whatever happens is the will of God, and the author of this particular article takes that as representative of Christianity or a Christian view of things. I don't want to speak for Rick Warren; he can speak for himself. But the idea that whatever happens, God wills, if that's interpreted in a fatalistic way, that whatever happens is going to happen, and there's no such thing as real freedom or real what we call secondary causality, real causal influences in the world that are not directly attributable to God. If that's the point that's being made, then I would have an objection to that, and I would have to disagree with it. I'm not familiar with the book, or I haven't read the book that's being used as the primary basis for this, so I can't comment on that. But I can comment more generally on the idea that whatever happens, God wills. Therefore, well, the argument begins with that whatever happens, God wills it. Lots of horrible things happen in the world. Therefore, Christianity is ridiculous because there's so many terrible things that happen in the world. Before I make a few observations, quick observations, in response to this, I would only want to point out that the atheist criticism of the Christian response to this problem, and this is a real problem of human existence, the problem of how do I explain the tragedies of the world, how do I explain or understand or cope with the moments of loss and the terrible things that happen in the world, earthquakes and tornadoes and hurricanes and illnesses, diseases, malnutrition. There are lots of horrible things that happen in our world. Not to forget the good, but there are terrible things that happen in the world. And so we all have to struggle with this. And what I would want to say is, in all of these arguments, the Christian is put on the defensive. An argument is made, and then we're expected to respond to that. But I would only highlight the fact that the atheist responds to this challenge. If I were to turn it back on the atheist and say, how do you deal with suffering in the world? How do you deal with these sorts of questions? The atheist has no resources to respond to the question except to say that's just how reality is. Reality is a brutal place. It's, these things just happen. That's how the world is. Human life has no meaning. There's no answer to the purpose of these things. That's just how the world is. It seems to me that the atheist takes their outrage at this situation and diverts their anger toward the Christian. At least oftentimes that's my experience. People are very worked up, very angry, very upset about terrible things that happen in the world, or perhaps things that happen in their own personal life. And because these terrible things have happened, they're looking for somewhere to direct their anger, and they direct it toward those who believe that the world has some meaning or has some purpose to things. And that even though we suffer a great deal oftentimes, even though there is a great deal of suffering in the world, that somehow beyond the suffering there is some ultimate meaning that's going to be accomplished, some purpose that's being accomplished through these pains and these tragedies, as well as all the great and wonderful things that happen in the world. But the atheist answer to the question himself, if I turn the question back on them, they have no resources to help us make sense of this. As creatures who are looking for meaning and purpose and a way to integrate our experience into a larger meaning or purpose or framework that makes sense out of life, the atheist is simply silent. There's nothing they have to offer. They have nothing to give us except that that's how the world is. So I just want to put things in perspective with that. And so let me offer a couple of ideas to maybe give us a few steps forward on this without trying to do away with the reality of human suffering and the evils that exist in the world. I would only offer a couple of quick observations. One of them is that, especially in the Catholic tradition, we do emphasize very heavily what I mentioned earlier, and that is that there is such a thing as real secondary causality and freedom in the world. Elsewhere, the same author of these articles criticizes or ridicules the notion of freedom as an explanation, but in fact it is a very important principle to us. The world is not just a bunch of robots or a bunch of beings that follow natural laws, and that's the end of the story about the world. We believe that there is such a thing as genuine freedom at the core of the universe made by God, so that the world might respond freely to its God. But because there is such a thing as freedom, and because there is sort of a world of secondary causal influences and chance events that take place in the world, this creates a level of autonomy of a sort of the creation. Now, the creation is not completely independent of its God. God is giving the world being at all times. God is supreme Lord over history. I believe that God is provident over the world. That is, that He's directing it to a good purpose. But that doesn't mean that there's no such thing as freedom in that course of events in history. And therefore, that upholding of the world by God alongside of real freedom that is present in the world creates a kind of drama, an almost unpredictability to the course of the world, certainly from a human perspective. And that's what makes the world, from a human perspective, unknowable in its exact workings. We don't know for sure what tomorrow holds. I can't predict what my life is going to hold in the future. And so there's a certain drama, a certain unexpectedness about life to which I must respond with freedom. And I must make a decision about how I will respond to this world. The atheist, I think, chooses a very pessimistic approach. Life doesn't mean anything. There is no hope. There is no purpose to it all. And you Christians are deluded in thinking that there is such a purpose. As a Christian, I look at the world and I see that I have a deep longing within that there be meaning, that there be purpose, that there be some ultimate significance to our lives in this world. And as a Christian, I believe that God has confirmed that longing and desire within us as human beings by coming and dwelling among us in the person of Jesus. It's through Jesus that God shows us that this life does have meaning and significance, and that we do have a future. The resurrection of Jesus is God showing us the future early in Christ rising again. So the Christian message offers to us hope, and it also shows us, I think, that the world is given a kind of freedom to develop and to respond to its God. And that makes it possible for there to be great evils in the world. And how do we respond to that? Do we see the evils of people suffering in the world, malnutrition or whatever? Do we see that and simply say, what a meaningless world this is? Or instead, do we see that as a call and as an opportunity to respond to that, and that longing within us to alleviate the sufferings of the world and to address the pains and difficulties of the world? Is that not God at work within us as secondary causes participating in building the universe that God has made? Can't we see our own interior awareness of suffering and pain and our desires to alleviate that by establishing missions and hospitals and works and giving funds to help feed those who have nothing and clothe them and so on? Aren't those efforts on our part inspired by an inner longing to bring meaning to a world that finds itself sometimes, because of various factors, unable to provide for its own or not interested in providing for its own and so on? From a Christian perspective, I think the pondering God's plan, well, we ponder God's plan and see that those painful things we find in the world are actually invitations to join in with the work of God. The atheist has nothing, again, to restate my same point, the atheist has nothing to offer us about this because they don't believe there's any meaning to it. The Christian offers hope, and that hope is found in us responding to God's call within us to participate in building His kingdom in this world.